In this lesson, we'll take a look at a few different ways that we can add primitive geometry objects to the scene, and we'll learn how we control whether that new geometry gets placed within a new or existing geometry container. As we saw in the last module, we can add primitive objects from the Create Shelf tab, and the default behavior is that each time we add a new object, a new geometry container is created at the object level for each new piece of geometry, and the surface operator generating each of these objects is placed within its own container. We can change that behavior though using this Tool Options dropdown and changing the selection from the default Creator Object level to Creating Context. Now with Creating Context selected, if I add another object from the Create Shelf tab, say a sphere, that surface operator now gets added inside this existing geometry container that I'm currently in. The same happens if I hover my cursor over the scene view and add a primitive object using the tab menu. So I'll add a tube this time, and as we can see with Creating Context selected, the tube surface operator gets added within the current geometry network rather than within its own geometry container at the object level. If I change the tool options back to Creator Object level though and add another object in the same way, and this time I'll add a torus. Now we're back to that default behavior of a new geometry container being added at the object level and a surface operator within that. If we add new primitive geometry via the tab menu whilst hovering over the network editor though, these tool options just get ignored. If we're at the geometry level in the network editor and we bring up the tab menu whilst hovering over the network editor, and I'll add a grid this time, then the primitive object operator will get added to that current network, regardless of whether we have Creator Object level or Creating Context set in the Tool Options menu. Another way that we can add primitive geometry objects to the scene is via the Radial menu if we have it set to Main or Modeling. I currently have mine set to Main, and so if I hover my cursor over the scene view and tap the C key to bring up the Radial menu, then I can just swipe through to the Create menu and then through to the Geometry menu, and here I can select a primitive object. And as we can see, adding geometry via the Radial menu in this way respects whichever option we have selected in the Tool Options menu. I still have Creator Object level selected, and so we see the new geometry containers being added at the object level for this sphere object and the sphere surface operator inside that. So that's a look at 3 different ways that we can add primitive geometry objects to a scene and how we use the Tool Option menu to choose whether we want to create new geometry within a new geometry container or within an existing current geometry container.